Published 1827 Est, the 8th of November 2017. Updated 2000 Est, the 8th of November 2017. The husband of a jailed British charity worker has begged Boris Johnson to take him to Iran so he can see his family for the first time in 18 months after a gaffe by the Foreign Secretary threatened to double her sentence. Nazanin Zaharia-Ratcliffe has been held in prison on spying charges since April last year, despite insisting her trip was just a holiday. But the Foreign Secretary wrongly said the charity worker was simply teaching people journalism during a 2016 trip to Iran in April last year, which is now being used as evidence to lock her up for a longer. Mr. Johnson has promised to fly out to Iran in a bid to free Mrs. Zaharia-Ratcliffe, but her husband, Richard Ratcliffe, is now eager to join him so he can see his wife and 3-year-old daughter, Gabriella, who is also stuck in Iran. Nazanin Zaharia-Ratcliffe is in prison in Iran after she was arrested on holiday. It is feared she could face a longer sentence after Boris Johnson mistakenly said she was training journalists. Nazanin Zaharia-Ratcliffe, who is jailed in Iran, and her 18-month-old daughter Gabriella told The Sun, "I will ask Boris if I can come with him when he visits Tehran, and travel under his protection. Not seeing Nazanin and my daughter in all this time has been really tough." The Iranians have kept stalling. It comes after Mr. Johnson finally confirmed he would meet her husband, after several public protestations by Mr. Ratcliffe that his requests for face-to-face dialogue were repeatedly ignored. The Foreign Secretary faced calls to resign after he mistakenly said Nazanin Zaharia-Ratcliffe, 38, was arrested after teaching journalists in the country. His statement was seized upon by some parts of the Iranian judiciary, who used it to haul the British Motheraphone back to court to face fresh propaganda charges. Mrs. Zaharia-Ratcliffe is serving a 5-year jail term following a secret trial in which she was convicted of plotting against the state. The Iranian judiciary's High Council for Human Rights said Mr. Johnson's remarks shed new light on her trip. At the weekend she was hauled back to court to face new charges of propaganda against the regime that could result in her sentence being doubled. Boris Johnson, pictured in Washington on Wednesday, faced calls to resign after he mistakenly said Nazanin Zaharia-Ratcliffe, 38, was arrested after teaching journalists in the country. Boris Johnson walks with British Ambassador to the United States Kim Darach following a meeting with U.S. Senate Majority Leader Republican Mitch McConnell. Her husband said she wept with despair after the latest development. Their daughter Gabriella, 3, has been praying to God for her mother's release. Mr. Johnson said he was sorry if his remarks had been misconstrued, but insisted they provided no justifiable basis for further charges against her. Earlier this week he telephoned his Iranian counterpart Javad Zarif to insist the government backed Mrs. Zaharia-Ratcliffe's claim that she was on holiday at the time of her arrest and requested her release on compassionate grounds. He said Mr. Zarif had told him that there was no link between his comments and the new charges against Mrs. Zaharia-Ratcliffe, which followed 2 days later. Mr. Johnson faced a backlash from MPs after refusing to accept he had been wrong. Former Tory Minister Anna Soubry said the lack of contrition is as shameful as the original error. Boris Johnson doesn't understand the magnitude of the job and responsibility he holds. Former Labour Minister Yvette Cooper rounded on Mr. Johnson, telling him the lives and safety of British citizens across the globe depend on having a Foreign Secretary who does not bluster and who is not too careless or too lazy to consider his words. Will he now apologise? Does he accept that he cannot be trusted to do this job and that he should resign? Shadow Foreign Secretary Emily Thornberry said it was clear Theresa May lacked the strength and authority to sack Mr. Johnson. But she added, how about the Foreign Secretary himself shows a bit of personal responsibility and admits that a job like this, where your words hold gravity and your actions have consequences, it is simply not the job for him. Ms. Zaharia-Ratcliffe and her husband, Richard, who works in the city as an accountant in Mr. Johnson, hit back, urging critics to train their fire on the Iranian regime. He said Ms. Thornberry can choose to heap blame onto the Foreign Office, which is trying to secure the release of Nazanin Zaharia-Ratcliffe, but in so doing she deflects blame and accountability from those who are truly responsible, the Iranian regime. Mr. Ratcliffe said his wife had wept down the phone after being told she would face fresh charges. She was just saying, "Why do I have to suffer? Why does my baby have to suffer?" She was gutted and furious, and cried most of the call. Former Labour Foreign Secretary Jack Straw accused Mr Johnson of a grave error, which he should have been much quicker to correct. Mr Ratcliffe dismissed Mr Johnson's claim that his words had been misconstrued, saying, "We all interpreted it in the same way, including the Iranian authorities." But he welcomed the Foreign Secretary's promise of renewed diplomatic efforts to free his wife. Downing Street said last night Theresa May had confidence in Mr Johnson. How a British mother's trip to Iran with her 18-month-old toddler turned into the stuff of nightmares for a woman supposedly leaving for a daring, clandestine operation to overthrow a foreign state, Nazanin Zaharia-Ratcliffe packed very oddly. Rather than secret radios or James Bond-style gadgets, the new mother took few of her own clothes, so as to leave space for all the essentials needed to transport an 18-month-old toddler. The nappies, clothes, baby wipes and bottles were packed at home in West Hampstead, northwest London, where Nazanin lived with her English husband, Richard, a city accountant, and their daughter Gabriella. The family drove to Gatwick Airport on March 17 last year, had a meal at Giraffe Cafe, and chased after Gabriella as she ran through the airport giggling, her favourite blue rucksack on her back with a Peppa Pig toy inside. Ms. Zaharia-Ratcliffe's family said she was heartbroken when she learned about the setback. A dual British-Iranian national, Nazanin was flying to Iran to show her parents their new granddaughter. But, rather than joy, the trip turned into the stuff of nightmares. Today, more than 18 months after setting off, Nazanin is being held at Tehran's notorious Evin prison, a hellish place with secret cells where torture and UAL assault of prisoners is rife. Nazanin, 38, was arrested at Tehran Imam Khomeini International Airport as she prepared to board a flight back to London on April 3. She was hustled out of the airport and then disappeared. It later transpired that she had been held for 45 days in solitary confinement without access to a lawyer. Her crime, according to Iran's Revolutionary Guards, the charity worker was identified and arrested after massive intelligence operations and was one of the heads of foreign-linked hostile networks. Her family assume this may have been because of her job with the Thomson Reuters Foundation, whose stated aim is to bring together corporations, civil society, activists, philanthropists and top decision-makers to tackle some of the world's most pressing issues. She was also alleged to have conducted various missions, leading her criminal activities under the direction of media and intelligence services of foreign governments. Family in Iran received a phone call from the Revolutionary Guard saying her investigation relates to an issue of national security. The authorities separated Nazanin from her daughter and confiscated her British passport. Eventually, Gabriella was looked after by her grandparents. Richard, who had stayed in London, has been unable to obtain a visa to Iran. Feeling powerless, he pleaded for help to the British government, saying there has been no due process, no formal charges, no access to a lawyer, no explanation and no one has been able to see her. "I cannot see how this could be based on any substance. It's stud cruelty. If your national security is chasing young mothers and babies, that is just crazy." In the meantime, it was reported that Nazanin had received a 5-year jail sentence on a spying charge after a secret trial. And so the case dragged on until Boris Johnson's maladroit comments to the Commons Foreign Affairs Select Committee last week, playing into the Tehran regime's hands by saying Nazanin was teaching people journalism. The comment, which Johnson has since made clear was a mistake, provided the excuse for Iran's Revolutionary Council to haul Nazanin to a special court hearing in Evin prison. Weak, depressed and with her hair falling out from trauma, she was told her sentence would be doubled and she'd have to serve another 5 years in jail. Iranian officials said Mr. Johnson's statement has shed new light on the realities about Nazanin, which has been strongly denied previously by both her family and human rights activists such as Iranian Nobel Peace Prize winner Shirin Ebadi. The Iranian High Council's website now carries a story headlined "UK confirms Nazanin Zaharia-Ratcliffe was not in Iran for holiday," adding Johnson's statement shows that Nazanin had visited the country for anything but a holiday. So what is the truth? The facts suggest that the Iran government, not for the first time, is guilty of a monstrous miscarriage of justice. Of course, it was Iran which imposed a death sentence on Salman Rushdie in 1989 for alleged blasphemy in his book, The Satanic Verses. Nazanin had always been open about her work, first as an administrative assistant for the BBC as a young graduate, and then with the Thomson Reuters Foundation, a charity which helps train journalists abroad. Boris Johnson has denied claims his comments led to increased action against Muzahir Ratcliffe, yet Thomson Reuters does not operate in Iran, so why would she use a quick visit to see her parents to teach people journalism? Thomson Group chief executive Monique Villa says she has nothing to do with Iran in her work and the foundation doesn't work with Iran anyway, so we have no idea why she has been detained. What's more, Nazanin's family point out she would hardly endanger her daughter by doing anything that would attract the attention of the hardliners who run the country, nor would she endanger the lives of her elderly parents who live there. The truth is that Iran's laws are so flexible that anyone can be charged with virtually anything, should the state security apparatus demand it. Charges drawn from the Islamic Penal Code include gathering and colluding to commit crimes against national security, forming a group composed of more than two people with the purpose of disrupting national security and/or membership of a group with the purpose of disrupting national security. Other charges commonly used to prosecute human rights defenders include spreading propaganda against the system, insulting the supreme leader and insulting Islamic sanctities. Nazanin was initially taken from Tehran to a jail hundreds of miles away called Kerman Central, where she was held in solitary confinement in the Revolutionary Guard's interrogation facility. According to her husband, she was questioned for days in a bare room under a single light bulb, and told she would never see her child or family again. He said the authorities seemed convinced that her work with Thomson Reuters and previous job as an assistant for BBC Media Action, the corporation's international development charity, posed a threat to Iranian national security. He says they told her, if you just cooperate, this will be over. We'll let you phone your family. Nazanin grew up in Tehran, and was a gifted pupil who studied English literature at the city's university. Her language skills led to her to be hired as a translator for international charities such as the Red Cross and the World Health Organization. She was awarded a scholarship to study for a master's at London Met University, and met Richard through a mutual friend. They married in Winchester in 2009, which made Nazanin a dual British-Iranian national, and their daughter was born in 2014. Meanwhile, Richard's career thrived and he became an auditor in the city. The family had traveled to Iran before without any difficulty, and visa applications meant the authorities were aware of their employment records. Speaking yesterday of his wife's ordeal, Richard said, she put on a brave face as always, but our daughter picked up on the fact that her grandparents were upset at having just heard about the sudden new charges. Gabriella is very sensitive and aware. She's obviously getting older, so she understands more what's happening around her, but not everything. Muzahir Ratcliffe's husband Richard was hoping she would be home by Christmas before the Foreign Secretary's comments. She knows Mommy is in prison and thinks of me as being in prison as well, because we are only able to communicate via Skype. Gabriella thinks it is some sort of phone prison. She told her mummy on Sunday that she was praying to God for her to be released. Richard also says his wife has been subjected to psychological torture, held in solitary confinement with a light permanently on, and blindfolded when taken outside. The worst period was in Kerman, he told me. When Nazanin came out of solitary there, she was unable to walk unaided. After becoming depressed and suicidal, Nazanin was moved from solitary confinement to the women's ward, where she now shares a cell with 6 other so-called enemies of the regime. Heartbreakingly, father and daughter maintain the relationship almost 3,500 miles apart by playing games on the phone. She reads to her dollies with me on the phone. We did the best we can, he says. Nazanin has been allowed weekly visits from her daughter, and her husband has promised not to bring Gabriella back to London until his wife is freed. Until this week, Richard had hoped his wife would be released before Christmas. He says, my wife only went to Iran to show off her baby to family and friends. She was doing the most normal thing in the world. How they can make up to these charges is difficult to comprehend. Richard Ratcliffe revealed today that he has still had no contact from Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson following the gaffe. The city accountant said he is unable to get to Iran to visit his daughter because he cannot get a visa, but added it would be great to go with the Foreign Secretary when he goes. However, he also told ITV's Good Morning Britain that he had not spoken to Mr. Johnson. Speaking about the gaffe, Mr. Ratcliffe said he said it on last Wednesday, and he also said it in the context of condemning Iran and saying, listen, she was just there training journalists and that's fine. So at the beginning I was like, oh, finally the government has condemned what Iran is doing. And then I thought, well, no, that's not quite right. Didn't think more of it until suddenly 2 days later she was taken into court again, into the Revolutionary Court. He was then asked on the show, presented by Susanna Reid and DailyMail.com US editor-at-large Piers Morgan, if that was as a direct result of what Mr. Johnson said. Mr. Ratcliffe added it wasn't clear on the day she was in court. The following day the judiciary published an article on their website saying the UK has confirmed that Nazanin wasn't on holiday. Richard Ratcliffe said he is unable to get to Iran to visit his daughter because he cannot get a visa, but added it would be great to go with the Foreign Secretary. There's an attempt with this sudden new trial to try and frame her for something else. The crime SHES being accused of is spreading propaganda against the regime. So connecting journalism training, and, of course, being a journalist is fine, training journalists is perfectly fine, but it can be used and spun in ways, this is why we've got her, there's more, her family just say she was on holiday but she wasn't really. Talking about his wife's response to Mr. Johnson's gaffe, he said first, she heard being taken into court, and meeting Judge Salavati, so her instant response was just bewilderment and just crying down the phone. She was in tears as a result of being taken in court. And then was sort of why and what's happened. So I said well maybe it was because of the Foreign Secretary. In fairness, it was clearer once the article came out. Mr. Ratcliffe Centre appeared on Good Morning Britain with presenters Susanna Reid and DailyMail.com US editor-at-large Piers Morgan left, along with MP Tulip Siddiq, and journalist Tom Newton Dunn-Wright asked if more attention on his wife's case after Mr. Johnson's gaffe could actually be positive. Mr. Ratcliffe said the hope is that more people looking and seeing, look, this is just outrageous, the truth will come out. Obviously it was a really tough week. It was a tough week that she was brought into court. The sort of going around, the media attention, the care that people give, the care that your viewers have given, and all the comments we get on our petition, that helps keep me going. He added a wife at the end of the phone every so often just asking me will I be home for Christmas, looking for that reassurance. Asked how his daughter is coping, he said she's okay, shes obviously too little to really understand. She picked up on Sunday how upset her mummy was and how upset her granny was, and that they were quiet and gave them a big cuddle to try and cheer them up.